Welcome to the HDR Info Session with Chicago Photoshop Group. This is a brief session about HDR photography. Well, let me tell you what HDR is and what it isn't. It's not a camera. Technically, there is no HDR camera, but there are cameras that are better than others suited for HDR photography. It's a style of photography that's post-processed. Some like it and some do not. As a matter of fact, there's some hate websites for HDR. HDR stands for High Dynamic Range. It's basically taking one image or a series of images and adjusting the contrast ratios. It's giving a different look and feel than a normal photo. The first part of this video, I'm going to talk about easy HDR, where you can dive in on your iPhone. This is technically not true HDR, but it'll get your feet wet. So with the update to the iPhone 4S, you have HDR capability. So you can see here on the screen, you can actually select HDR to turn it on. And what will happen is that the photo that you take, there'll be a light exposure and a dark exposure. You're going to take those two photos and import them into an app, an HDR app on your iPhone to edit. There are currently 263 apps in the App Store where you can actually complete the HDR with presets and also manual controls. Here is a photo I took of my alley. I HDR'd it on my iPhone. So you have standard dynamic range and converting it to high dynamic range. You'll notice the contrast and the colors are richer. In part 2, I'm going to talk about single raw image or single image HDR, also known as pseudo HDR. Here I've taken a raw image that I captured on my Leica Deluxe 6, which is a high-end point and shoot, and used software. I used Nik software to create an HDR image. There are lots of HDR software out there. However, the three most popular ones are Nik, Topaz, and Photomatix. Part 3 is true HDR. This is where you're taking multiple exposure captures, and of course you'll need a tripod to get the best results. In true HDR, you have to take 3 or more different photos in different exposures using a tripod to reduce camera shake, and then combining those photos in HDR supported software. Here I'm demonstrating with some screen captures in Photoshop where I take my 3 pictures and merge to HDR, which I'll show you guys in an info session. And the last image, if you Google HDR processing, there's a wealth of resources on the internet and so much more about HDR photography. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you at the info session.